So I remember in one of our collaborations as Constellators, we were reviewing the workshop experience, and this idea of exploring rage and passion arose through you, and I really resonated with that idea. And when I reflected on it, rage and passion seemed to me, I think part of my excitement was because they seemed to me to be part of my direct experience right now. And also I can see the importance of exploring rage and passion in the Constellations practitioners that I supervise and that I teach. So it would be great to get your perspective first on why rage and passion is resonant for you as a practitioner and as a woman right now.
Well, I think what happened in doing mainly the training actually more than facilitating workshops, was that it just started to emerge. And people were yawning, that was one sign. Sleepy, getting fidgety, that kind of thing. And somehow rage became the thing. And I went regularly to Germany at the time for an annual intensive in constellation work, and I started to become aware that there was often suppressed rage in the room, and it didn't seem to be somehow a permission within the group, within the constellation community, to express it. So I was kind of shocked by that and wondering what that was about. So that was where my interest started, in suppressed rage.
And I'm understanding that the suppressed rage is picked up in the holding circle sometimes.
Yeah, often.
But also on reflection, you could see that it's something that as constellators we might pull back from exploring so directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fairness it's understandable because violence often comes out of rage. Many people are really frightened of it, both their own and other people's. You know, ultimately it can lead to murder and all this sort of thing. And, you know, when you're facilitating, you don't really want to go into these very risky areas when constellation work is so powerful, you know, and something can erupt very quickly out of nowhere. So I understand it, but for me it felt like there was a whole chunk missing from the constellation work that I felt needed to somehow come in and be dealt with in whatever way.
I really agree. In my own practice, I remember in particular one constellation where the client was perennially frustrated and dissatisfied. And in the course of the constellation, the frustration turned to anger and then turned to rage. And then it was as though quite quickly we were dropping through layers of experience. And I got a sense that below the frustration and the anger and the rage, there then came some shame and some grief. And below the shame and the grief, there was the most incredible love. And so that really intrigued me, that rage, for example, might not just be an energy in its own right, but that it could mask things that are as threatening to the ego, I guess, and also to the organisation, as love.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be both ways. Like, there are other things that mask rage, like some people who cry a lot, that kind of thing, or want to live in a sort of world of sweetness and light, and the rage is underneath that. But yes, often if you get through rage, underneath there is deep love, despair sometimes, and grief very often. And for me, the difference between rage and anger is that rage gets you in touch with that real life force. You know, it's like, how I describe it is, I say it's like coming up through the bowels of the earth, through your body and out. Well, love does something similar, you know, it's an all-encompassing feeling.
Almost a primal.
Yes, it's primal, it's primal. So some people call anger rage, and rage anger, vice versa.
Yes.
But, you know, if you experience rage, it can be really transformative, especially if you can get through it to that layer underneath.
Before we go further in exploring rage in its own sense, I also resonate with something that you said 2 minutes ago, that in the constellations field there's sometimes perhaps insufficient attention to holding these more disorganizing, disruptive, sometimes violent forces. because I've seen that sometimes the emotions of deep human emotions that constellations can touch can be partly healing, but sometimes they're too sugary. Sometimes the feeling, like the emotional climate of the constellation is very saccharine.
Yeah.
And the resolution doesn't feel solid. There's a sort of emptiness about the resolution. And I think that's where I'm interested as a constellations teacher in paying attention to these energies of rage and passion, because they aren't culturally supported.
No.
And yet they're such an important part of human experience. And if we're to engage meaningfully as constellations practitioners, we have to understand when to open the constellation up to some of those primal bowels of the earth energies, and what it takes to hold those energies, how to work with them creatively and productively. Certainly that's never been part of my direct training. It's something that I've been learning along the path. I guess you have.
Yeah, I mean, I guess doing Gestalt training, I did touch on some aspects of rage. I mean, Gestalt was very good at that in the olden days. There was people raging all over the place, but I mean, some of it was not, for me, the kind of earthy, true rage. It was more anger. But I had that training in being more expressive, which I think helped.
Yes.
But this feels different. It's of a different level somehow, as with all constellation work, if you really engage in it. And when I'm doing the training, you know, I set out from the start saying this is not a joyride, you know, this is hard work. And there's no easy way. You can't float over the top.
And you're talking a lot about rage so far as we're opening the subject up. But my invitation to you is to include passion as well.
Well, I mean, for me, passion, it can be a way to really helpfully and usefully express rage, interestingly, because it's the same energy. So if you become really creative, you know, if you have a lot of sexual energy, that helps. You know? So someone who's very rageful can really transfer that energy into something creative or highly physical or sexual as a way of managing their rage. So passion is wonderful. You know, it's an amazing energy.
I really agree. It's where I find the overlap that you're pointing to, you know, the connection between rage and passion, is that I think of them both as life-giving forces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the connection with them, and particularly for rage in its contained form, is really healthy.
Yeah.
The connection with passion, I also think of as connected to will, is hugely generative. And so I see the importance of rage and passion and the connection between them in very different and sometimes unexpected aspects of organizational life, and the need for this exploration, not just in family systems and in business systems, but actually if you look out into the world in some of the social systems, you can see the impact of a badly expressed, uncontained rage. You can see the impact of when passion is not engaged with, when we might hold back from those important drives for connection and union.
Yeah, I mean, I see this even in my grandchildren. You know, like I learned from Gestalt that aggression is just moving forward. And unwittingly, as parents and grandparents, we can suppress that natural aggressive energy in children, and that's part of their passion. Yes. And so I think it starts unconsciously very early on, and I often wonder if there was more of a positive channel for that energy, whether we'd have less war. You know, because war is like a dissociated way of expressing rage. It's kind of out there, there's no real person-to-person contact, you know, it's just a body of people killing another body of people. So somehow if that energy were more encouraged when we're very young, maybe, I don't know if that's true, but maybe. You know, I remember talking to you about that exhibition I went to in Birmingham, reluctantly, a computer exhibition with my ex-husband, and I walked into the room and the energy and passion in that room was phenomenal. I've never forgotten it. Yes. And I remember saying to him, you know, if this energy could be put into some creative, I mean, I know computers are wonderful, but, you know, there are other ways that we could really do things in the world that would channel that energy in such a positive way, because it was so beautiful.
Well, that's the really lovely example in that story of how enterprises and how businesses and organisations can really productively harness passion.
Yeah.
Because the function of passion, I guess, the purpose of passion is generation.
Yeah.
I mean, passion for me is not just a heart energy, but the genitals are connected with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's got something that really is about generation and appropriate sexual energy, which gives birth to innovation in organisations. It gives birth to enterprise. It fuels enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I understand you to be talking about in that example of going to...
I am talking about that, yeah. And
so
if we sort of come back to a personal level in terms of sexual energy and this sort of thing, I mean, I think that's an amazing place to look at this passion, because certainly in this country, and I think it's probably true in other cultures, lots of people in long-term relationships suppress their passion for the sake of security, affection, long-term togetherness, all wonderful things, but they do something with their passion on the way.
Well, in addition to that list, I see in the work that I do very often the connection between the loss of passionate energy, or the inability to really connect with that driver of passion, and the loss of will. It's as though in our earliest years, I guess this is the interrupted reaching out movement, in our earliest years we might have learned that our yearning cannot be held, that we can't have what we want.
Yeah.
So the second that we connect with an impulse, a passionate impulse to have something, we collapse inwardly.
Yeah. I mean, Bert Hellinger talks so clearly about that in the early days. How he said if you're reaching towards your mother in particular, but also the father, and you interrupt it for whatever reason, then every time you reach towards something, if you reach at all, you just turn around and come back in on yourself, and that's the root of neurosis.
Exactly. What do you understand to be the function of rage?
I think function is a freeing up of a blocked energy, moving through something it's a transformational process, moving through something to somewhere better. That would be my way of describing it, yeah.
My own sense of the function of rage is it's both propulsive and it puts boundaries in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? But it's different for me than, say, hate. I think the function of hate is to separate, to sever. The function of anger, you could say, is to establish boundaries. But the difference with rage is, I think that there's often something that doesn't want to let go. That it can attach. People can attach through rage if that rage can be met and held and engaged with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a nice way of seeing it, yeah. I mean, I always think of the animal process, fight, flight or freeze. And often rage is you're fighting for your life. It feels like you're fighting for your life.
Yes.
But yes, if you're met in that rage, it can be amazing. Well, I mean, I learned about hate from you. I had always thought about hate as a congealed rage. That was my kind of definition of hate. I thought about my own hate, and I thought, I haven't raged at that person, so it's sat in my gut for however long, and it's got twisted and gone mouldy, and it's turned into hate. So that's how I saw hate. But this idea of hate being a severing process was new to me, so interesting, yeah.
And I think we've agreed in what we've said already that some of the things that block our access to hate, I guess, is guilt and fear of if we unleash our hate, what might happen. And so it's the destructive potential of hate which I think makes so many of us step back from it.
And also the superego, this constant judge that says it's not right, it's not okay to have negative feelings, you shouldn't say nasty things to people, that kind of stuff that's so culturally embedded,
And the superego is itself systemically acquired, right? It's the internalized voices of our earliest caregivers.
Absolutely, yeah. The other thing I was talking to you about earlier is that the rage, for me, gives you self-agency. So if you're traumatized, it's an active process that can move you through your trauma.
Say more about that, because I think you've more familiarity with working with trauma as a psychotherapist and a family systems constellator. So elaborate on that, please.
Well, Peter Levine is well known of dealing with what he calls somatic experiencing, and his view is that any trauma comes in through the body, via the body and the right brain. And what happens is we try and make sense of it with our left brain too quickly. So we create a story. And that then crushes the natural body process of allowing the trauma to move through. And he's got this amazing film. He shows a polar bear is being tracked by a helicopter, and it's running and running, and they shoot a tranquilizer dart into it. And then he shows the polar bear coming round from the trauma. And initially it's just shaking, its whole body is shaking, and it's breathing very rapidly like this, and then slowly the breathing starts to slow down, become more measured, and eventually becomes back to normal, and the polar bear just gets up and walks away. And he said that's trauma just going through your body in the way that it needs to go through your body, and then you just get up and you walk away and it's gone.
As an uninterrupted gestalt,
An uninterrupted gestalt. And what we've done as humans is we've become afraid of the very energy that is helping us to move that trauma through. So we suppress the energy that actually is needed to mobilize the body again. And the other thing is repeated trauma means over time we start to give up expressing anything at all. So then we go into that helpless state.
And there's the connection with the loss of will that
That's
I think
it.
I was pointing
That's
to.
the lack of self-agency. And if you've got a poor attachment, which comes back to the interrupted reaching out movement, it's much harder for you to find that self-agency. So that's part of it for me. You know, if I can help people to find that rageful energy, they can come through their trauma more easily.
And develop greater self-agency.
And develop greater self-agency, and that's where will comes in.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Passion.
Yep.
Okay. So what for you is the function of passion?
Gosh, aliveness, keeping everything moving forward, creativity. Where would we be without creativity? And you think of musicians and artists and all kinds of beauty is linked into passion, actually. I mean, sexual passion is an obvious one because we wouldn't be able to produce life if we didn't have sexual passion. So, I mean, I know it's much wider than that, but, you know, that's originally the human passion is about that. So, yeah, that's how I would see it. It brings us a massive amount of beauty in this world.
I agree. It's creative, but in all of the different facets of creativity, it's procreative.
Yes.
Right? In terms of its generative ability, we have children through passion.
Yeah.
But also in organisations, I can see that the passionate drive fuels the kind of excitement and energy you experienced in the exhibition you went to with your ex-husband. So it connects very much in organisational practice, for me, with innovation, with entrepreneurship, with the ability for generative leadership.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, businesses wouldn't get anywhere without passion, would they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So perhaps in that sense the function of passion is to support new things coming into being.
Yeah. New energies, new ideas.
New projects, new families.
Yeah. And you know, it's a way also of like people who are traumatized can transform their trauma into something creative and passionate.
How have you seen that?
Well, I've heard Jan Jakob Stam talk about it. You know, he works within organisational things, and he said this. You know, he talked about trauma in organisations, actually. You know, and actually, if you can transform that into something positive, then we're the better for it. I saw the film of Tchaikovsky. You know, a deeply traumatised man. But look at the energy that he put into writing his symphonies, and I mean, some amazing music that came out of that. And I would imagine, I've never done the research, but I would imagine most famous musicians, sports people, all kinds of things, have been traumatized somewhere, and they're turning their trauma into something really beautiful for the world.
I love you bringing in the arts, and the first person that comes to mind for me is Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah.
And just the quality of marks that he makes, you know, show both rage and passion.
Yeah.
And the unity of them.
Yeah, I mean, we're so blessed with all that kind of creative energy that's been transformative, you know, for all of us, actually.
Yes.
So we need trauma, strangely.
And so why do you think passion is less supported in our society? It's easy for me to understand why rage might be less supported culturally, but what blocks our access to passion in your experience?
I think it's hard to know where it all started, but certainly in Britain, we're very suppressed sexually. There seems to be a big hang-up for us about sexual distortions and all kinds of things, you know, and I think it's linked into that, a fear of being rampant sexually and not having any control and creating havoc and all this kind of thing. So, and there's so much publicity about the distortions of sexuality and paedophilia and all sorts of things, putting fear into people. So I think people become really afraid of expressing their sexual passion along, and of course all the other passion goes into the same bag, you know, so they're not expressing that.
Exactly.
Then all their creative energy can get suppressed as well, you know. So it's a sad process.
It is a sad process, and it's a dangerous process, often in organisational life. Relationships between bosses and their subordinates can become very sexualised. There can be inappropriate sexual conduct, and that can be cultural and systemic.
Yeah.
Because those primal energies aren't held, aren't contained, aren't respected. I think the relationship between rage and passion and trauma that you've just opened up is interesting. Do you think that rage and passion can only be accessed through trauma, or are there other ways?
Interesting question. In my own experience, only through trauma. But I don't know whether that's possible. I mean, it must be possible, mustn't it? I'm just thinking now, there must be a way. I mean, we're born, we have that energy naturally in us. Being born is traumatic. Even if we have a very natural birth, we're fighting for our lives. So in that sense, I suppose we're all traumatized. But you know, if you have a very healthy natural birth, and then you have a very healthy natural relationship with your parents, and they're there for you, and they allow you to express yourself whenever and however you want to, maybe it's possible that energy is just there and it just comes up through the bowels of the earth when it's needed. Yeah, it'd be nice to think that way. I suppose because of the work I do, I've never seen it. Because I'm within the field of trauma most of the time, working with people who are mostly traumatized in some form or other. So it's hard for me to step outside of that.
But you must also come across the positive expression of passion frequently.
Oh, for sure.
So one doesn't need to be traumatized, I guess, to have healthy, open access to the energies of passion.
I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, it's difficult to step outside the field, isn't it, and see it through a different lens. I would love to think that were true. And maybe in different cultures it's more true, you know, where there is a greater freedom, maybe in some of these tribal communities, for instance, where they're more able to be in touch with the earth, with nature, you know, because nature is very passionate.
Sure. And raging, I mean,
tempestuous
weather, for example.
Yeah, and that's there without any interference from us. So at that level, I guess, yes, it is a natural thing. So, you know, I feel encouraged by that, just thinking that,
Yes, I mean, I guess until now, I haven't examined this, but I have a sense of rage and passion as being primal energies, of them having really positive influences and benefits in our life. And I more imagine that the blocks to accessing healthy rage and healthy passion are what give rise to distorted forms of relating.
Yeah, definitely.
That can be traumatizing.
Yeah.
And then the journey through trauma, I would understand as the journey toward reconnection with the healthy forms of rage and passion.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to put it, yeah.
So that also opens the question for me about whether or not you consider rage and passion to be primary emotions, secondary emotions, systemic emotions, meta-emotions. You know, and often emotions, feelings, and neither one or another, of course. Yeah. But if we look through the lens of the 4 different kinds of emotions that we talk about and engage with as constellators, what does that framing throw up for you about our exploration of rage and passion?
Well, when I talk about rage, I usually talk about it as a primal emotion.
Primal.
Primal, yes, and primary, both, yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting that I use the word coming up through the bowels of the earth, because it is kind of earthed, if you like, and connected to the earth and the planet. It's definitely a belly energy, yeah. So I rarely would see that as a secondary emotion, except for someone who's stuck in their rage. And they're raging here, there and everywhere, they're violent, they don't know how to contain it. Then I think it's a secondary emotion, and there's something else lodged underneath that they're not getting to, which, as we said earlier, would be grief, despair, love, all those other energies that are lying underneath. But I would say the majority of the time that rage and passion are primary energies.
I guess they can have systemic forms, right? Systemic rage, systemic passion, where through entanglement we carry the consequences of the actions of generations before us.
Yeah, I mean, things like, rebellions in cultures, I think in South Africa particularly, Germany, those sorts of things, that's mass rage.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am recalling a story of a financial services company that's been a client of mine, and they had one division in a country that really struggled commercially and couldn't make headway, and 3 different chief executives, each were diagnosed with cancer, one after the other.
Wow.
That for me is an indicator to start looking to the possibility of systemic rage or of diverted or suppressed passion.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you raise the issue of cancer, because again, this is another hot potato. And I have strong feelings passionate feelings about this. I'm approached by cancer charities and asked to pay money. I say, I won't pay it unless you look at something that's beyond the physical, the psychological, the systemic aspects of cancer.
Yes.
Then I'll give you some money. But until you do that, I'm not just giving you loads of funds to plough into researching the physicality of cancer, because I just think that's not the way to go.
I'm reading a book by Gabor Mate at the moment, who's very influential and becoming quite a popular thinker on the relationship between disease and kind of, I guess, the psychosociology of disease. He's looking at the patterns of disease that we are likely to get when we have different patterns of suppressed feeling. Yeah. What do you know about that in your work?
I'm a great fan of Gabor Mate's. Because I think he's kind of come alongside constellation work unwittingly.
Yes, he has.
I think he's done Almas, but the diamond approach that you've done. But I don't know if he's done any constellation work, but he speaks some truths that really fit with the constellation work.
And you also, I know, are a fan of the work of Stefan Hausner, who's done it as a constellator, a lot of great work around the relationship between illness and systemic entanglement. Yeah,
what he does is he sets up representatives for illnesses in the constellation, and those illnesses find their way within the family system, and they attach to wherever the illness began. And yes, it's suppressed feelings, it's also sometimes missing people. And Bert Hellinger did some really amazing constellations on that. He did one where somebody had 11 different illnesses.
Wow.
And he set up the 11 illnesses. And the person representing the client was surrounded by these 11 illnesses. They formed a circle around the client. And after the constellation, the client discovered that I think it was either her grandmother or great-grandmother, I can't remember which, had given away 11 children.
Astonishing.
Yeah, so those illnesses then were representing missing people. So I think that's definitely one aspect of it in terms of constellation work, that the illness comes to you because there's a missing person trying to be remembered. And we do the same with the illness as was originally done with the missing person. We want to push it away. Yes. So, if we can embrace the illness, we might find out something about it. But, one of Gabor Mate's YouTubes is all illness is in authenticity. Well, that was brilliant. Yes. And he quoted the example of 2 women who'd had breast cancer. And, when they wrote in the obituary, they were saying, like, oh, amazing woman, never got angry with anybody, so sweet, so kind, so generous. And he said, we just need to be a bit more nasty.
Absolutely.
And then we won't get ill.
That's the authentic relating.
Yeah.
And I think very often we have an assumption of spirituality, an assumption of being good people, that we have to block those more, or those less supported emotions, rage, hate, anger.
Yeah.
And the consequences of that in terms of our physical systems can be disastrous. I think I'm right in saying that there's often a link systemically between women who might have breast cancer, for example, and the suppression of their feelings of rage toward their mother.
Yeah. I mean, that's never been put that kind of cause and effect way, but definitely I've seen that many, many times. And that was the other aspect that Bert Hellinger worked with. You know, he showed how there was another woman who had, I don't know how many illnesses, and he just said, how's your relationship with your mother? And she said, I hate my mother. And he said, exactly. Yeah. So then he set up the illnesses, and they were just forming a boundary between her and her mother, like a barrier. And she couldn't reach towards her mother. And I mean, she did a beautiful reaching out movement towards her mother in the end, you know. It's really lovely. Yes. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. You know, you're eating away at your own female organs, then that's got to be connected to the maternal line and your own mother.
Do you see any manifestations of psychosomatic illness in men?
Sure. I mean, I think the same is true for men. You know, there's a lot of prostate cancer. Well, then look at your relationship with your father. You know, depression in men, you know, where's your relationship with your father? Where's your aliveness coming through on that male side?
Yes.
And I think culturally it's very hard to be a man these days. You know, everything's thrown up in the air. We don't know where we are in terms of what roles we have. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You know, some aspects of it are wonderful.
I really
but
agree. I think
we don't know where we are.
Women's rage against men there is destructive, but it has the potential, if it's held and engaged with appropriately, usefully and constructively, to be transformational. Yeah,
but you know, what I experience with us as women, and of course this is a generalisation, is on the one hand, we want men to be sweet and loving and nice and kind and motherly figures, and on the other hand, we want them to be men. And we want to see that passion and that male energy, you know, and we want it both ways. Well, how the hell do men cope with that? You know, we want them to help in the home, we want them to help with the children, but we also want them to earn a good living, you know. So I think it's kind of swung, you know, from being very oppressed as women to being very demanding, actually. And I don't know how we're going to find the middle place. But, you know, I've had that in the trainings that I've done. There's been a kind of a war between the men and the women for a while. Like set up against each other and not really understanding each other, and we've come through it, you know. And there's been really deep grief about how hard it is for men and women to meet.
So there again, in that brief story of how you work with men and women in your Constellations trainings, we've got that sense that below rage there can sometimes be unexpressed and untapped grief.
Yeah, definitely.
For me, grief is always a sense of the absence of love.
Yeah.
It's an unfulfilled capacity to love and be loved. That creates grief. It's unfinished business of love.
It's a lovely way to put it, actually. Not heard it said like that before. I like that. Yeah.
Let's talk, Barbara, about how to work with rage and passion as constellators.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm remembering that Albrecht Marr, in an article that you gave me, that he wrote in the Knowing Field some time ago, said that perhaps 5% of the constellations that he facilitates are constellations where the direct engagement with the raw rage is important. But even in that 5%, I guess Constellations practitioners need to feel equipped to hold those forces, also the forces of passion.
Yeah.
So what's your sense of how to engage with rage and passion, either as two distinct energies or the combination of them as a constellator?
I mean, I think the first thing is notice if you're afraid. Because
as the constellator?
As the constellator, because if you're afraid, you won't be able to hold what comes. And then I say to trainees Don't worry about that. You know, if you feel afraid, just draw a halt and say, no, don't go there. Because if you can't hold it, then everyone's going to feel afraid themselves.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. But I think to access it, it's about focusing in on your body and what's happening, letting your body shake, do whatever it needs to, use your mouth. You know, you can make an enormous, passionate sound with your voice without using any words.
As the facilitator.
Yeah.
As the constellation.
Yeah, yeah, and just encourage that in people, you know. And then I think I did get this from that article. I certainly got it from Albrecht Marr, the idea of two people or more than two people holding someone either side, holding their arms. So there's a kind of measure of restraint, if you like, but then allowing them to let that energy move through their bodies so they're contained, not restricted, but contained.
For me, that's exactly, that's the adjustment, is not restraining rage, but containing rage.
Yeah.
Giving it a container in which it can be experienced, but without being fully acted out in its destructive potential.
Yeah. And I think it's a fine line. It's quite a tricky one, you know, and I've come unstuck a couple of times with that, you know, like, oh, this has gone a bit too far, or, you know, or I've done the opposite and suppressed it too soon, you know.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it's quite hard with group energy when there's a lot going on to manage that process.
I guess in my own practice, I haven't yet explored the kind of containment by putting representatives either side of the enraged person that you've just described. What I'm more familiar with is working through issues where, for example, in a constellation recently, the client was in the constellation as himself, and there was an aspect of rage against what I think was probably his father, and to support that I put in representatives for the male line of previous generations, really so that this guy could express his rage fully, and his father, with the support of the male line, could really hold that without crumbling.
Yeah.
And in those sorts of circumstances, then I think it's quite common in my practice just to see the client move down through those layers of rage to grief, to love, and then the reconnection to the generative capacity is opened again.
Yes, I mean, I think that idea of supporting someone by putting people behind them is a really important one. Yeah, I've done that, you know, and then that allows the client to have the fullness of their rage, because of course this is quite often what's happened. You know, they see their parents as traumatized or weak or however you want to describe it, so they feel bigger, and then they believe that their rage is not containable. So if you set up the representative of their parent, and then they have generations behind them, so the client then feels safe. They can allow the fullness of what they've not allowed before, because there's something that can really hold it. So I think that's a really positive way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen you do that too. Sometimes fear and sometimes guilt come up in the client experience or in the representative of the client in working in these ways. How do you deal with that?
Well, I have a very straightforward way of dealing with guilt. I just go, well, look, that's your superego, and your superego comes from your relationship with your parents. So until you accept your parents for who they are, warts and all, then you're going to continue to attack yourself and feel bad about yourself and feel guilt. So just get on and look at your parents and see them for who they are and accept them. I mean, I don't say it quite that blatantly, but sometimes I do.
So you might pause the constellation at that point and then say that there's further work to be done with the parents.
Yes, yes. I mean, guilt usually comes in afterwards for me.
Sure.
People feel guilty after they've expressed it, and then I can say things like that. But if they stop themselves at the time, I mean, it's a standard Gestalt thing, you know, that guilt is just resentment and anger turned back in on yourself.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is. And so if you can express it, then you won't be attacking yourself and blaming yourself and criticising yourself. Yeah, it's externalised.
And I think the fear can often come out of a sort of inflated sense of the client's own power and own strength. Right? We can be afraid of the destructive potential of releasing our rage, so we might suppress it and hold back.
Yeah, and that's back to feeling bigger than our parents. not feeling contained by our parents. And children are so savvy with that, they're so in touch with the soul, with the unspoken. They know whether their parents can deal with what they're bringing, and then they create that belief that, yeah, I'm bigger than anybody, and so I'm omnipotent, and so I can destroy everything in sight. So it's a wonderful, I had this myself, it's a wonderful relief to see, oh, actually, I'm just ordinary, and I can express these feelings and feel contained, and it's all right, I'm not going to destroy the world.
So we've just discussed the containment and facilitation of rage in constellations. Mm-hmm. What's your sense of the containment and facilitation of passion? Because often in passion, as I've said already, there's not just the heart energy, but there's the erotic energy that's involved, and that is life-giving and wonderful. It adds electricity to things, right? Even to ideas. But again, it can have a distorted dimension if it's not contained and facilitated appropriately. How do you do that?
Yeah, usually the issue of passion that comes to me as a facilitator and trainer is sexual abuse. So we're starting on that traumatized place and the distortion, so we have to come from that end of it. But there was a lovely story that I felt very moved by myself about this guy who was staying with two young girls, friends of his, their daughters, and these two young girls had had a bath and they were running around and they were just flirting with him, they were 7, 8 years of age, something like that, lovely, innocent energy, wiggling their bums in front of him and that sort of stuff. And he said he felt that edge of his own passion ignited, not wanting to cross that boundary, and at the same time not wanting to suppress this beautiful, passionate, innocent energy that was coming through these two girls. Yes. So what he did was grab a towel and he wrapped these two girls in the towel. So he contained them and he just went, whoa, like that. And they absolutely loved it. So that would, for me, was a really good example of how you manage passion and the expression of passion. And in the constellation, it's very rare for somebody to come and say, I just want to find my passionate energy. Usually they come because they've been traumatized in some form or other. So we have to start there and then see if we can find a way to transform that energy. And we were talking about the orders early on, and if the orders are in place, so the father looks to his wife first, and then together they look to the child. So the girl child relates to the father through the mother. Then those orders are in place and the child is free and that energy can flow. So, there's nothing wrong with feeling a frisson when you look at your young teenage daughter. Yeah. Of course you will, because she's the daughter of your wife. And if you have a healthy relationship with your wife, then it's lovely for your daughter to see, oh, this is the first man in my life, my father, and he feels something when he looks at me. Isn't that beautiful?
Well, the beauty of it is in the holding of strong male energy that can not engage or transgress in any way, but can enjoy the arising of the erotic in the relationship, and for the daughter to feel the safety of that in the presence of a man.
Exactly that, yeah. And there's another story I heard, I think it's somewhere in India, I don't know if it's a particular religion or what it is, but what they do is when the girl child gets to 13, menstruation age, they go into the temple, and all the women take the girl to the front of the temple, and then they bring the father in, and she undresses, and she dances naked in front of her father. And the women wait until they see the twinkle in his eye. And when they see the twinkle in his eye, the girl gets dressed and leaves.
I remember one of my teachers, and I know one of your teachers, Hunter Beaumont, told me that story.
Right, okay.
About 20 years ago,
right.
And that really touched me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Too. Yeah, it had me in tears because it really resonated with something in me, like that kind of longing for us, as children, to feel that we have that potential for that sexual energy and passion. It's so important. Yes. And it gets so easily distorted and suppressed and all the rest of it, and it's sad. It's very sad that happens.
I've really enjoyed this inquiry between us into rage and passion and how they show themselves in Constellations work. In conclusion, where are you in this inquiry now? What are you seeing that you might be seeing differently?
I feel like my lens has widened on it, definitely, and looking at it kind of systemically as well as individually, and looking beyond trauma, that was helpful. You know, seeing that, you know, maybe all this energy doesn't just have to be linked to trauma, maybe it's there naturally anyway, and we can find an avenue for it without having to be traumatized first.
Yes.
So yeah, that's something that I would want to inquire into further. I'm going to look around and see, do I know people who are in healthy relationships and have that kind of passion? You know, it'd be really a fascinating process to research. So yeah, I feel like I've widened my lens on the whole process. Yeah, it's been really helpful talking to you.
And for me, I think I'm making different links into the forces in organisational life of creativity and innovation, into leadership drive and that kind of entrepreneurial energy, into how we work with conflict and how we are with authority. And something that we've not talked about yet, but I see time and again in my work, is the difficult relationship between leaders and teams. And how often, you know, teams of saboteurs can disrupt the healthy flow of organisational and of business life. And so my lens has also broadened, but there are a few areas where I realise that I want to take my inquiry more deeply as well in my own practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to kind of have this overlap with organisational stuff and personal stuff, isn't it? And seeing how one gets mirrored in the other.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, exactly. And how, I'm not sure which way around it goes, but how both family systems and organisational systems are themselves part of bigger social systems, not each other, the way that we've touched on that.
Yes.
The interrelationship between systems and the way that entanglement can show itself through rage and through passion across the different systems of which we're a part. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was great.